Hi, I'm Maxwell, and today I'm going to be showing you how to assemble your NERDSwerve. Let's get started. For those of you who don't know much about NERDSwerve yet, it might be helpful to take a look at the CAD. It's linked in the description. Each swerve pod requires 2 motors, an absolute encoder, a stealth wheel, 5mm hex shaft collars, bearings, and bearing inserts, along with shaft keys, nuts, and screws. In order to assemble a pod, you will need a standard and metric Allen wrench set, a 3/8" wrench, and possibly a hammer. The full chassis also requires all of the electronics necessary for a full FRC robot. Start by assembling the bottom half. Press your 6 bearings into the inside of the forks. The bearing in the middle faces towards the bevel gear side. Press the short shaft into the bevel gear side. Slide in the shaft collar first, then the bevel gear. Next, slide in the T-shaped spur gear. Push the long shaft in through the spur gear side. Engage the spur gear and then push the shaft through. Add on the wheel and 2 shaft collars. Make sure that both shafts are pressed through evenly before tightening the shaft collars. Next, press the swivel bearing into the retaining ring. You might need to use a vise or an arbor press. Push the bearing into the forks assembly. Screw on the azimuth ring just until it's snug. Don't tighten it too much or the 3D print will strip. Now onto the top half. Start by assembling your absolute encoder and screw it into the threaded holes. Make sure the wires are facing outwards. Then, press the bearing into the bottom of the encoder hole. Press your absolute encoder magnet into the encoder gear. Press the gear into the bearing with the magnet facing the absolute encoder. Screw your motors onto the mounts with a few screws. Tighten them until they're snug. Face the wires in the same direction as the absolute encoder wires. If you're using a Neo, make sure you have a shaft key in the motor. Then, push the gears in. The bevel gear goes on the circular end and the T-shaped gear goes on the square end. Make sure they both see all the way in. Last, press 5 hex nuts into the 5 hex holes. Make sure the nylock is on the top side. The bottom of the nuts should be flush with the bottom of the 3D print. Now you can attach your pod onto your drivetrain. Take your 1/4" mainboard and screw the top half on first, with the screws underneath and the nuts on top. Next, put the last 2 bearings onto these holes on the bottom half. Press the halves together and wiggle the bottom until all 3 bearings engage. This bottom half is hot swappable, so anything that breaks on the bottom can be replaced without taking apart the whole pod or switching the motors. Hand tighten the last 5 bolts onto the nuts that you press into the 3D print. Now assemble your other pod, velcro on some electronics, and you're ready to start programming. Good luck and happy swerving!